Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're just going to wait a minute or two as folks file in, and we will get started probably 1 minute after the hour. Hi, folks. For those just coming now, I just gave this announcement. I'll say one more time. We're probably going to start about a minute after the hour so we can wait for everyone to file in our digital room. So we'll speak to you in 30 seconds. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and we're so glad you're able to join us to reflect on the semester we've just had for our Virtual Fairs Fall 2020 Benchmarks and Best Practices webinar. And one nice thing, I've seen someone do it already, you can let us know who you are if you'd like in the chat. That's always welcome. So looking forward to meeting you virtually. So before we get started, I'd like to let everyone know a few housekeeping notes. So let's go to the next. Great, this slide, perfect. First, we are going to be recording the webinar. We always do, and we will always send it to you. Anyone who registered is going to receive a recording after the event, and so will any colleagues who registered but weren't able to attend, or if you have to drop off early, or if you miss a section, you will get a recording of the event. You can also forward the recording when you receive it to colleagues when we send it to you. We actually have a brand new page on our website, which I'm taking a moment to advertise here, that has all information about upcoming and past webinars, including recordings. We're very proud of it, so we encourage you to check it out. It's always a place that you can find recordings of events. So that's one thing. Second, I wanted to note that we're going to have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. You don't have to wait to ask your questions. You can feel free to use Zoom's the Q&A bubble at the bottom of the panel. You simply type in your Q&A, and we have some folks on the back end who can help answer questions live, or we can save them for our Q&A section at the end. The only thing I will say is that we ask for a little bit of grace and allowance from you guys because we do have a lot of people on our webinar today. Right now, we are almost to 800 people. So sometimes we get thousands of questions and we just do our best to try to answer them, but sometimes it's simply not possible. So that is my next note on questions. Don't let that stop you. Put your questions in. Okay, next slide. I wanted to let you know, again, recording of the webinar will be coming. Actually, a good note is it'll be coming tomorrow, most likely. So we'd like 24 hours of delay. And when it comes, it'll come with an expanded version of these slides, included with more slides that you don't even see here that have benchmarks across a group of school and fair cohorts. So that is exciting. We're really eager to share that with you. And if you go to the next slide, I just pulled in a quick example of these are the different cuts that we'll be providing in addition to the slides that we share here today when we share the report with you afterwards. So we'll look at fairs that are industry specific as a cohort. We'll look at HBCU schools fairs. We'll look at doctoral universities, master's colleges and universities, baccalaureate colleges, and small schools. So, and we included definitions, and we also included our sort of rationale behind why we used a mix of Carnegie classifications and a few others in our report. All right, so next I'd like to introduce the folks that are speaking on our webinar today. Hello to my colleagues. The first one is Christine Cruz Vergara, the VP of Higher Education and Student Success. So hi, Christine.
Hey there, excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Also with us is Jake Becker, the Director of Education Product. Hi, Jake.
Good morning, good to be here.
Thank you. And then of course, we have Britt Gergen, our Senior Product Marketing Manager. Hello, Britt.
Of course. Hello, Katie, and hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy to be here.
Thank you. All right, so next slide is our agenda. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to focus first on outcomes across the network. That is to say, when we look at all the fairs in aggregate that happened and over a period of time, we start with the very first fair that kicked off on July 30th. And then we cut everything off November 25th so we could get kind of a clean break. We'll look at all of those fairs and the outcomes of them. Then we'll dive deeper and look at students at virtual fairs based on some of our user research, our product outcomes, what we know about attendance. Then we'll focus on employers at virtual fairs. And then finally, we'll end with some announcements and further reading. So let's go to the next slide. I did want to include this just so we know, because I have a suspicion that many of our questions will revolve around this. So all sources for data are noted on every slide. The majority of our product data came from a full review of all virtual fairs held on the network between July 30th and November 25th. When appropriate, we sought a comparison to 2019. And when we did that, we used data from August 1st, 2019 to December 1st, 2019. And we only included fairs where Handshake was used for check-ins. For student sentiment, not only did we dip into our product data, but we also tracked sentiment a variety of places. So we did qualitative user research studies with 9 students, qualitative meaning interviews, which is where we get some of the quotes we share. We had an ongoing virtual fair feedback survey with 450 and counting student respondents. It's something that's offered at the end of every fair. In November, we did a virtual fair feedback survey with 922 student respondents. That was to really find out, those are all students who didn't attend, who registered but didn't come or they didn't sign up. So we were curious about what was going on with them. And then also in November, we did a general student trend survey with all of our users to get overall sentiments on recruiting during COVID, of which there's a subset who also went to virtual fairs. So we got some information there. It's all noted on each slide. So with that, I'm going to kick it off with a poll. So let's see if this, here we go. Okay, we have a kickoff poll and we're going to have one at the end as well. So our kickoff poll, first question, do you plan to use Handshake to host at least one virtual fair this spring semester? And our second question is, did you use virtual fairs saved reports to help create your story of how virtual fairs performed? And you can blame the lack of a question mark at the end of that sentence on me. My apologies. So we're eager to hear your answers. I can see how many folks have voted. About half of you have. So I encourage everyone to go in and select your answers. All right. Let's end the poll. All righty. So 84% said yes, they're planning to use Handshake to host at least one. 4% said no, and 11% are still unsure. Great to know. If you did not get your answer counted and you want to let us know, we always appreciate it, so you can always let us know. Did you use virtual fair save reports to help create your story of how virtual fairs performed? 35% said yes, and 65% said no. That is great information for us as we help popularize that feature, because it really should be something that you can use yourself to start to pull some of the information that we're going to be showing you for your own school. So with that, it's a great transition. I'd like to bring back my colleague, Christine. Christine, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much. I don't know if you want to comment on the poll or just get started. I will leave it to you.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's great to see where everybody stands, especially before our session today. Hopefully we'll inspire some of you to host one in the spring, and we'll revisit this question a little bit later today. So first, let's talk about some of our network outcomes and what we've been able to see looking at all of our data across our network for this fall. So first, the question really is, what does a great virtual fair look like? In August of 2020, as you all know, we officially launched a reimagined virtual fair experience. So now we really want to reflect on what those outcomes look like. From attendance to sentiment to comparison with peer institutions, I really want to make sure that you have some of the data to begin to plan ahead for the spring. This has really been an unprecedented year. We've heard that over and over again. This fall in particular was certainly unique, and none of us have had any benchmarks to be able to know, am I doing okay? Am I not doing okay? How do I stand kind of compared to other institutions? And so what we wanted to do was to be able to work quickly and provide you with a benchmark of at least one semester's worth of virtual fairs so that it gives you a place to start and we can begin to improve for the spring semester. So these findings from the fall will be a guide in measuring your outcomes and improving the practices so that we can actually create more virtual connections between your students and employers in the coming months. So let's jump right in to the first set of numbers. All right, what you can see here is that overwhelmingly, our higher education network tremendously relied on virtual fairs on Handshake to be able to connect our employers and students this fall. 702 colleges and universities hosted their virtual fair on Handshake. That's about 70% of our partners, which equated to about 2,300 virtual fairs hosted and 886,000 total sessions that were held. Now that does include both group as well as one-on-one. Let's break that down a little bit further so you can actually see what that looks like for students as well as number of employers. So over 260,000 students, unique students, attended group or one-on-one sessions with an employer this fall. We had 81,000 unique recruiters attend and over 17,000 unique employers represented across all of your various fairs. On this next slide, what you're going to see here is essentially a heat map. What we wanted to show you was, generally speaking, what are the most popular sort of days. As you can see, no surprise, Wednesday and Thursdays in September and October are the peak fair days. That's when we have the most number of fairs. And some of you might actually be interested. We actually got this question quite a bit from some of our partners. What were the most number of fairs that you hosted on any given day? And you can see that during our peak times, we were hosting as many as 89, kind of always hovers around like 89 to 90-ish fairs in a single day in the spring and October, in the September and October timeframe. So I thought this was kind of an interesting map just to give us a sense of that. Now, this next slide is actually one of my absolute favorites. We have a new metric that you're able to use, and this is a connections metric. So over this past fall, we were able to help you facilitate over 1 million total connections between students and employers. That is really fantastic, and it's pretty amazing to be able to actually quantify the real face-to-face interactions that are happening virtually. This is a number, I'm going to pause on this for just a second. This is really important because in our previous physical fairs, and for those of you that don't know me, I used to work in academia, I used to work in career services, and my job when I was at Georgetown was actually to run all of the physical fairs that Georgetown had. And back then, when you're doing a physical fair, you can report on how many employers come, you can report on your student attendance, right? You can report on satisfaction of the fair. You can report on a lot of things, but the one thing that you could never really report on because it was very difficult to be able to actually track is how many connections were really made between students and employers. And that is definitely one of the benefits of virtual is that we are actually able to tell you that. We can tell you how many connections were actually made between your students and employers. And this is something that I would really like to emphasize to each of you as you are thinking about your story, as you're thinking about what you share up to your senior administrators, please make sure to wrap this into your story because now you're able to actually track that and you're able to follow up on that, which is super, super exciting. You can actually see in this next quote here from one of our partners, Cynthia Downing from North Carolina A&T. She had a very successful fall. They were able to serve over 1,600 students and 300 employers with a whopping 10,000 connections, which is super, super exciting. And so anyway, I think Cynthia's quote here really brings home just how important that's been and something that she is able to now talk about, where before she was only able to sort of speculate. I think that's super powerful. All right. On this next slide, one of the things that we found is that when you hosted an industry-focused fair, on average, we saw more connections being made. So you can see the difference here. 402 to 513 are the two average numbers. When we hosted an industry-focused fair, on average, you saw about 513 at minimum student and employer connections versus 402. So it's just something to keep in mind as you think about your spring fairs and whether or not you may, for those of you that didn't do industry-focused fairs, whether or not you may want to do that. And you'll hear a little bit more in the data when we go into the student section about why that might be important, what that means in terms of marketing, and how students sort of perceive that in terms of their areas of interest and relevancy.
Hey, Christine.
Oh yeah.
I'm popping in here because I had a couple questions that I just want to make sure we catch here, and it's
Sure.
the definition of connections. So let's just knock that one out now, so people don't feel confused about it. Connections are the number of times any student and an employer met. And so that means a student might meet with multiple employers, could be multiple points of connection there. It's just the overall total points of connection that happened in that event. And any of my colleagues who feel that I did an insufficient job, feel free to jump in, but hopefully that answers that question because we did get that one.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. I'm glad you're looking at the chat while I'm speaking. So thank you so much. Absolutely. All right, let's go to some key takeaways for you here from this section. You'll notice throughout our presentation today, we actually have ideas for reflection in each of our different sections so that it gives you some really tangible takeaways as you begin to plan for the spring. So for this one, first point is the one that I already hammered home. Start to learn and share about your own total connections. I think this is really important. Flag this number of student-employer connections. Try to find ways to not only measure this, but to increase it. We obviously can help you with the measuring piece. You can cut this data further by using some of the reports to better understand the connections by student type, by student demographic, by employer type and industry. Those are other ideas for how you can bring to life your total connection story. The second is plan ahead around peak season. Now, obviously, it's normal that that's going to be peak season. We expect that that is obviously going to be when it's busiest. But the reason we bring that to light for you is because for some of you, you might be trying to attract certain employers to your fair. And if you know that that is peak season, some of them might be stretched thin and it may be harder for you to get some of them at your fair, or they may not be able to spend as much time or have as many reps. So it's just something to keep in mind. If there are certain folks that you are really trying to attract to your fair, you can sort of plan ahead in thinking through some of that. And then the third is advise employers to count connections to prove ROI too. This is also a really great metric for employers as they're thinking about their funnel and they're thinking about their conversion rates. So you can also help them understand their own return on investment in this virtual recruiting. Again, you're going to hear us talk about this just a little bit more in the employer section, but one of the things that we heard anecdotally from employers over and over and over again this fall was how much they appreciated that we had both one-on-one schedules as well as group, so that they weren't sitting in a virtual room wondering if anyone was going to show up, but they felt like it was a good use of their time because they knew who they were going to be meeting with and they knew what they were going to be doing. So those are some of our ideas for reflection. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Britt to talk a little bit more about students.
Thanks so much, Christine. And before I do that, I wanted to say for the total connections reflection that you just shared, we have a saved report template that will allow you to really easily pull that total connections number for one of your fairs or all of your fairs across the entire fall. One of my colleagues is going to share that in the chat, so everyone should definitely check that out. And while you're there, there are actually 17 career fair pre-built report templates in our analytics section that can help you pull a lot of the same metrics that we're looking at today. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. So we'll put the connections report template in the chat, and then you can also check out all of the others too as a great way to look at these statistics for your specific student body. Excellent. So as Christine said, I am going to start diving into insights about student engagement and sentiment, and we're going to look at it before, during, and after fairs. And as Katie mentioned at the top of today's webinar, this data is coming from a couple of different sources. The engagement data is coming primarily from Handshake. So we're just looking at actual numbers from our product. And then the sentiment and the qualitative feedback and the quotes, they are coming from research sessions and surveys. So let's start by talking about how students were feeling going into virtual fairs this fall. Now, as you can imagine, we've done a ton of user research with students to understand the impact that COVID has had on their job search and their lives in general. But with respect to the job search in particular, and what you can see on this slide here is that we found about 39% of students felt confident or extremely confident that they would find a job or internship by summer 2021. Meanwhile, about 27% felt unconfident or extremely unconfident. And this is a really important thing to think about when you're considering the mindset of a student coming into a virtual fair, what their level of confidence is and how that might kind of color their interactions with employers. I'll also note that in the same survey, 85% of students said that the COVID-19 pandemic has sustained or increased the priority of their job search. So students are really putting more focus on their job search as a result, as they are eager to secure employment after graduation. All right, next, let's move into some insights about student participation at virtual fairs. To start, let's take a look at our attendance funnel. So as most of you probably know, students that are interested in attending the fair start by registering for the fair, and then they're able to go and look at individual fair sessions that are offered by employers, and they can sign up for those sessions, whether they're one-on-ones or group sessions. 81% of students who signed up for an individual session with an employer attended the fair. If you look at registration to attendance, so that first step, or the red bar here, if you look at registration to attendance, we saw that about 55% of students attended. And to help put that into perspective, most virtual events see about 45% registration to attendance rates. And again, on Handshake, it was about 55%. And that 45% attendance rate benchmark is actually one that we use for our own webinars, and it's proving to be true today, actually, at today's session. Now, I also want to call out that a 68% conversion from registration to sign up is likely due to the low bar for virtual fair registration. So tracking the session sign up to attendance rate, that's this blue bar to the yellow bar, which is 81%, is probably a more reliable predictor of intent and follow through. And we'll talk about more tips on driving student attendance, and we'll look at some breakdowns by cohort in later slides so you can better understand kind of like how those numbers split out when we look at different segments of students. We can also talk about how the attendance funnel compares to 2019. So in 2019, 72% of students who registered for an in-person fair attended that fair. The 2020 virtual fair registration to attendance rate is 55%, like we called out on that last slide. But again, a more reliable metric for intent and follow through around a virtual fair is the rate of students sign up for individual sessions to attendance. And if you'll recall, that was 81%. And the reason we are talking about comparing those numbers is that the sign up to attendance metric is a more deliberate signal that a student understands and wants to attend the fair. All right, I really like this slide a lot. So as you're watching student registrations roll in, it's really important to remember the insights from this slide. Almost a third of students are registering for virtual fairs on the day of the fair or the day before. The median day for registration is 5 days before the fair. So basically what this is saying is most of the sign up and registration activity is happening in the week before your fair. That's when students are generally taking action, and that means that those final days are critical from a marketing perspective. And when we think about some of the automated emails that Handshake is sending, we have a 2-day reminder and then a reminder on the day of the fair for students who have already registered. So again, we know that that's when students are really in the mindset of preparing for or being interested in this fair. So that's when we hit them with our Handshake reminder emails. And it's a good thing to remember for your own marketing as well, whether you are reaching out to students who have already registered or who have yet to register but might be interested in doing so. Okay, now let's take a look at the attendance rates for group and one-on-one sessions. You can see group attendance rates on the left and one-on-ones on the right. And here we're looking at the percent of students that signed up for one of these sessions that ultimately attended. And the main takeaway here is that we have a very low no-show rate for one-on-one sessions. And we think this suggests that the students that signed up for those sessions appear to be more highly motivated to attend. They are committed to meeting with a recruiter, especially because it's a one-on-one scenario where it's pretty obvious if they are not present. So again, we see a lower no-show rate for one-on-one sessions, and that suggests higher intent students. All right, let's talk about the breakdown of class years at fairs. Oh, excuse me, sorry, that's not what this is. This is, we're gonna talk about why students register but don't sign up for a session. Sorry, this chart looks like another one that we're gonna talk about in a minute. So we wanted to better understand why students register for the fair, but then don't take that next step to sign up for individual fair sessions. So we ran a survey with students who did just that, 922 of them. These are people who fell off at some point in the process. And they shared that the top reason for registering but not signing up for any individual sessions was that a conflict came up. After that, students mentioned that they weren't interested in the employers that were attending, or if there were employers that were of interest to them, they couldn't find any sessions that worked with their schedule. Also worth noting that 14% said that they did not know they needed to sign up for sessions. So this is all information that we've taken and will help inform future updates and marketing efforts that aim to get students to move from registration to signing up for individual sessions. Now, we can also look at why students signed up for an individual session with an employer and didn't attend. But as you might expect, the reasons shared by those students is pretty similar to the ones we just looked at. 49% of students who signed up for a session with an individual employer and then didn't show up said that a conflict came up. 18% chose our other response, but we had a free text field there, and most students shared that they weren't interested in the employers or that they got really busy with schoolwork. And 14% of students who signed up for a session but did not attend said that they forgot about it. Now, students who did attend the fair attended a median of 2 sessions. If we look at the students who attended at least one one-on-one session, they attended a median of 2 one-on-one sessions. So if we segment out our audience of attendees to just people who attended at least one one-on-one session, the median was 2. And then similarly for group sessions, if you attended at least one group session, the median attendance was 2 group sessions. Now, as you digest these numbers, and I'll call out too that we have these numbers for each benchmark that Katie mentioned at the top of today's webinar, it's important to think about how they could inform your recommendations to employers about the number of sessions they offer. So for example, if we do a little bit of napkin math, if your fair has 100 students attend, we can say that they'll likely sign up for about 200 sessions in total. And then based on the number of employers that you have attending, you can kind of understand where their session fill rates might sit and how many sessions you might suggest that they schedule. All right, here's the slide that I thought was coming a couple slides earlier. The class of 2021, so students who are graduating this academic year, were probably unsurprisingly the largest percentage of fair goers this fall. And they were followed sequentially by the class of 2022, 2023, and 2024. We also had some schools offering fairs to alums, recent grads. So the class of 2020 and 2019 also make up a small little segment of attendees. Now, I do want to clarify that in this figure, we use class of designations, and we derive class of from a mixture of data points within Handshake. So we look at the student's school year, so for example, junior, and also their degree type, for example, bachelor's degree. And that helps us serve up a measurement of the student's graduation timing, which is really helpful for this type of visualization. It can also be helpful for employers who might be looking at a mix of undergraduate and graduate students as well. So next up, I believe I'm going to pass it over to Jake to take us through some more During the Fair student insights. Jake, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, Britt. Great. So I'm gonna walk through some more insights from which types of students are attending, in what areas and what majors, and help us build some trends and get a sense of how things are changing year over year. So here we're looking at signups by students by major group. So one note is that little blue bar on the right. That's where we don't have information on major group. It's not pulled in from our partners. You can imagine that's sort of spread out amongst all the others fairly evenly based on this ratio. So, we have the primary major group is business, entrepreneurship, and human resources, followed by engineering and computer science. So those tend to be the top three, social sciences as a fourth. So that's pretty typical of what we'd expect to see, and that STEM majors are making up the majority. So this, we're going to walk through breakdown by the industry representation of the employers in a little bit. And this likely contributed to the increase of signups for these specific major groups. So what we're seeing is essentially the comparison between students at virtual fairs in this past fall with respect to how many students in the Handshake network are in those major groups. So you'll note that engineering, business, computer science had much higher representation at virtual fairs than their population within the network. And conversely, health and social science were a little bit lower than their representation. This maps pretty evenly to what we've seen in previous years. And note that health professions are one of the top 5 industries hiring, generally, if you look at hiring trends, but just not in fairs. And so an interesting insight is just looking at how, employers hiring in the health field are not using fairs perhaps as much. Next, we're going to look at the breakdown for female students specifically. So female student representation across all majors increased compared to 2019. They increased by about 3 percentage points. It was about 43% last year, 46% this year. So, that is still a 9% difference than their representation in the entire network. So females represent 55% of students in the Handshake network, but only 46% of those attending fairs. So we're acutely aware of this. We take this data seriously. We spend a lot of time at Handshake researching and understanding equity and which students have access to fairs, which industries they're part of, and the major groups that those students are a part of. And so one interesting note is that female student representation at virtual fairs increased among a couple key major groups, notably manufacturing and skilled trades, that was up by about 5%. Engineering was up by about 3%, and computer science was up about 1.5% when compared to the representation on the network as a whole. So we're seeing overrepresentation in those 3 areas by female students. And there will be a lot more fine-grained information about female student representation at fairs in our more final report that gets sent out with a lot more breakout outside of this webinar. So next we're going to look at Black and Latinx students. They made up 21% of signups at virtual fairs in 2020. One note is that we do not have great data historically, and this is serving as a baseline for virtual fairs moving forward. So one note is that Black and Latinx students make up about 23 to 24% of the students at schools that hosted virtual fairs on Handshake. So it's a bit nuanced. So we're looking at the population of students who hosted fairs on Handshake, or schools that hosted fairs, and the students at those schools. And we're seeing Black and Latinx students slightly underrepresented. Now, that could be within a margin of error based on the analysis that we've run. And as I mentioned, this is serving as a baseline, and it may actually be an increase from previous years when there were more in-person fairs. And so this will serve as a benchmark for equity analysis moving forward. I would highlight that it is incumbent upon all of us in all of our roles to develop strategies and to continue to track representation for these groups at virtual fairs in the future. It's a huge focus of Handshakes moving forward. And we very much look forward to working with our partners on different ways of reaching out to different student groups and making sure we have equitable access to these types of events. And definitely more to come on that topic, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Britt to talk through some outcomes that we've seen after the fair.
Thanks, Jake. Okay, so let's dive right in. First, I want to touch on a couple of the key values that students got out of attending virtual fairs. And this is coming from data collected from students who had attended a fair. They ranked the 3 most helpful aspects of attending as learning about company culture and jobs, making personal connections through one-on-one sessions, and being able to schedule meetings in advance to skip long lines. I especially want to call out the personal connection through one-on-ones. This was shared not only in aggregate form in surveys, but also in individual research sessions where students said that, especially in a time where everyone is remote, it is extra helpful to be able to make that connection with a recruiter one-on-one, even if it's between computers or phones. So we saw that this ability to make that closer connection in one-on-one sessions was really highly valuable and something that students liked a lot. Also in that post-fair survey that we shared with students who attended a fair, we asked about whether students felt like they were able to sign up for sessions that they wanted to attend. 74% of students said that they were able to get all the sessions that they wanted to attend on their schedule. And 77% agreed that the employers who attended the fair were of interest to them. Now, we can also look at the inverse. So what were some of the challenges that students ran into in the virtual recruiting setting? 41% said that they had a concern about standing out to employers. Again, this is another reason why one-on-one sessions were, we think, slightly preferred by students. It was obviously much easier to stand out when it's just you and the recruiter. But it was still something that students wanted help with. 18% also shared that they wanted more help getting information from employers, whether that was answers to their questions or information about the types of jobs that they were recruiting for. And then 15% did share that the sessions that they wanted to sign up for were not available. And we'll talk about this more in the takeaways section, but as you can see, a lot of these concerns are questions that career services folks are really good at answering. These are all about how to present yourself in a virtual setting and how to get answers to your questions and show off your best self. So we're really eager to continue learning from you all about the best ways to share that information with students, and we encourage you to, keep doing the good work of helping students with these concerns too. Now, as you might expect, students that attended a fair were really likely to take additional action in Handshake because attending a fair designated or suggested that you were probably a high intent student when it comes to your job search. So we found that 58% of fair attendees viewed an employer, browsed jobs, or applied for a job on Handshake within 2 weeks after the fair. So over half of students that attended a fair were taking one of these high value actions within 2 weeks after. And if we look more specifically at the day of the fair and the day after, there are some really interesting metrics about activity. So on the day of the fair, and I should say too, these numbers, we're comparing a fair goer to a student who just logs into Handshake and doesn't attend a fair. So compared to somebody who just logs into Handshake, a student who attends a fair is 12 times more likely to follow an employer. And if you'll recall, or I can share too, a little bit more context on that, following an employer allows the student to get an email whenever the employer is hosting an event on campus or posts a job on Handshake. So it's a great way for students to kind of keep tabs on their favorite employers that they are interested in hearing from. And there are a lot of great call outs in the virtual fair experience that encourage students to take the action of following the employer to stay updated in the future. And again, you're 12 times more likely if you attend a fair versus just logging into Handshake. Now, if we look at the return rate of students, so a student attends a fair, they are 1.1x more likely to log into Handshake the next day compared to a student who just logged in. So if we look at a student who logged in on the day of the fair but didn't attend the fair, and a student who logged in and did attend the fair, the student who attended the fair is more likely to come back to Handshake the next day. And then similarly, students who attended a fair are also significantly more likely to submit an application the next day. So when we look at, two students who logged into Handshake on the same day, one attended a fair, one didn't. The one who attended a fair is 1.5x more likely to submit an application the following day. So again, all of this to say that attending a fair shows that students are higher intent and also leads to more of these high value actions in the days following the fair. All right, so let's talk about some more reflections, ways that you can use this data to inform your approach to hosting virtual fairs in the spring and beyond. One really important one is building hype around key fair dates. And very soon we're going to be releasing more information and stories from schools about how they've done this. But here's what we're talking about. When we think about the chart that I showed about when students sign up, a strong marketing push in the day or two before your fair are going to go a long way. That's when students are more likely to sign up for the fair anyway, and that's when they are more likely to make the commitment to come. So we've created a ton of really great pre-built collateral. It's in our virtual fair launch kit that helps you teach students the basics so that you can focus on being creative and building a really robust marketing plan that reaches out to students at the most critical times. Also, knowing that students sign up in big numbers on the days before the fair, you should be sure to inform your employers that they'll see a surge in session signups right before the fair too. So if they're a week out and they're worried about the number of sessions that they have filled, obviously, you want to help them get in front of more students, but you can also share that they're going to see this surge right before the fair happens. Now, on that note, we've seen a lot of schools succeed in getting students to sign up for employer sessions when they involve employers in their marketing plans. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. A really simple one is to just send targeted emails to subsets of students promoting employers that would specifically be of interest to those students. Or, and this is where it starts getting really cool and creative, you can work with employers on social campaigns or videos that you share pre-fair. So this is a great way to highlight the employers that are going to be coming. You can have them share information about their company and the roles that they're hiring for, or we've also seen really cool programs where career centers have partnered with employers and just have the employers share tips about how to show up to a virtual recruiting event. And it's a nice way to kind of introduce the employers with some helpful information and let students kind of better understand who's going to be attending. And when it comes to helping students connect with relevant employers at virtual fairs, I want to share a quick reminder that Handshake now displays available fair sessions by relevance to the student. So when the student registers for the fair and goes to start looking at sessions, the top employer listed on the list of available sessions is going to be the one that we think is the most relevant to them. So this way they don't have to scroll to find employers that they're interested in. We've done a lot of the work on the back end for them so that they are immediately able to find what they're looking for. Another great tip, and again, one that we've seen implemented by a lot of schools really successfully, is to host a pre-fair session for students. Again, we're going back to capturing that excitement that students have about the fair in the couple of days before, and creating programming that boosts the values that resonate most with them. So talking about the fact that virtual fairs help you make a personal connection with employers, while at the same time addressing some of those concerns that students mentioned and that we talked about a couple of slides ago, like standing out in virtual meetings. Your audience is most captive in the days before the fair, so you have an opportunity to maximize the impact of the positives of attending a fair and help address some of the concerns that students have going into them. Finally, we want to encourage everybody, as we are, to improve diversity, inclusion, and equity. So when you are looking at the numbers for your fairs this fall, consider the demographic breakdown of the experience and where there were some gaps that you can make up. And then once you've identified those, as we have, you can consider custom outreach by major or student organization to help boost turnout in the spring. This is a really, incredibly important factor to keep in mind. And because of the data that lives in Handshake, you have the ability to identify these gaps and then start developing programming to reach out to these students. Christine, I wonder if you want to jump in and comment on that at all. I know this is a really important, issue for us across the board at Handshake.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And actually, let's save that to the very end for Q&A because I'm watching the time and I know we have a lot of good questions that are coming in. So let me just get through this last section with employers and then we can circle back to all of that. But thank you so much, Britt. I think that was really great. For this last section, we're going to talk a little bit about employers and insights from their experience. So on this very next slide, you're going to see it as kind of similar to the student slide. Almost all employers who registered set up schedules. You can see that there's very little drop-off between who registered, who was then approved, and then who made their schedule. So you can see that that is working very well. When you go to the next slide, this gives you a bit more information about the timing of how all of that happens. The vast majority of employers are creating their schedules the week before the fair. By the week before the fair, they should have their schedules all done. Half of the employers created schedules more than 2 weeks in advance. So I think this is where you're going to see some differences, possibly between sort of the sophistication of some of your employers that feel very comfortable, have already been doing many of these. I anticipate that as we have another semester of virtual fairs, you're going to see employers probably start to plan a little bit farther in advance. I would actually anticipate that when we look at this data again next semester, we're going to see that inch up a bit because they'll be more familiar. Right now, many of the employers were trying to figure out many different systems at the same time. They were also learning themselves. And of course, they were attending many, many fairs at the same time, and they needed to sort of allocate their time accordingly. On this next slide, I know there were some questions previously in the chat. This will answer some of that for you. The registered employers, these registered employers were the top 10 industries. And on the right-hand side, the top 10 job roles that we saw for registered employers. Now, as you can see, these fall into a lot of the technical majors and technical areas, but we do have education, government, healthcare in there that is not. I think this next slide in particular is quite interesting, which also speaks to some of the questions that I saw floating around in the chat, which is that one-on-one sessions did fill in varied ways, depending on the industry and depending on the employers. So the employers that had some of the highest session attendance were the ones highlighted there interior design, management consulting, and computer science. You see that? Now, the industries with the lowest session attendance, and I highlighted this one actually, other education actually stands for graduate school fairs. So graduate school fairs, unfortunately, we saw did not have as high of an attendance rate as the employers saw in the left-hand box. So if you plan on hosting a graduate school fair, you know that there might be more work that is needed, both for the graduate programs as well as for the students that may be interested in going into some of those areas. On this next slide, you can see that about half the sessions included one-on-one qualifications. So as many of you know, employers had the option to set qualifications. Now this is really, I'm gonna be honest with you, this is a double-edged sword. So a lot of employers really like the ability to be able to have one-on-one qualifications, and you saw a lot of interest and high value connections between students and employers that had one-on-one qualifications, because it increased the likelihood that the match and the conversation was going to be deeper and more meaningful. On the flip side, sometimes that kept some employers from being able to have fuller schedules, and sometimes that kept some students from being able to explore and to be able to have a conversation with an employer where they might not have met all the qualifications, but may really stand out in some other ways and still be able to win over that particular employer. So you really can see it from both ways. And I think it really comes down to specific employers, specific student populations, and sort of seeing what is best. Now, one-on-one qualifications currently can be applied to GPA, major, graduation date, and work authorization. And this, of course, is something that you can always encourage employers to remove if they are not seeing as many signups from students as well. And there are some schools that actually choose to tell their employers that they do not wish to allow them to have one-on-one qualifications. And of course, that is up to you if you choose to encourage your employers to move in that direction as well. All right, moving into ideas for reflection so that we can also get to some of your Q&A. Now, first is you could consider an incentive for early schedule creation, working with some of your employers to really capture their attention, getting them to do some things 2 weeks before. You could definitely remind them that having a late schedule created will mean that they could potentially miss out on some really great students, particularly the ones that are most motivated, that will be getting into the system early and will be creating their schedules early. So that is one note. The second is worry about everything, but panic about nothing. So since half of the students register within 5 days of the fair, please remind employers that they are going to see a surge. And I know that we've already kind of chatted about that a little bit before. One-on-ones are definitely the best when actively recruiting. This is, again, something that we hear regularly from many of our employers as well. They really enjoy the one-on-one sessions. I also saw in the chat that some schools have a lot of luck with first having the employers do some group sessions, getting some of the students' interest or kind of getting them warmed up, getting them interested, and then students sometimes signing up for one-on-ones afterward as well. So that is always an option too. But let them know that if they're really looking to hire, they should focus on one-on-one sessions. The no-show rate is lower, and it does indicate more motivated students that are ready for those conversations. The fourth is help employers from the industries that need a little bit of a boost. This was a big topic of conversation in the chat. I think we definitely saw some of the lesser known employers, they need more help. You can't just show up at a virtual fair in the same way that you show up at a physical event and hope that you might be able to grab a student. Now, I think what's important here is that the data shows us that we might have to take different strategies. And that is, of course, normal. Virtual is different than physical. So of course, we're gonna have to change our strategies, and employers and students are also going to have to change theirs. And it gives them a sense of what might have to be done there. I know Garth from MSU gave out some different suggestions on how they were actually able to increase the number of attendance, both from students and employers, even for lesser known companies. So there is a little bit of work there, pre-work, I should say, in thinking through what are creative strategies that might work for your particular population, your particular culture at your institution. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. I believe you have a poll, and we will go into our Q&A. Katie, take it away.
Great. All right. I have a poll just to kind of wrap up and reflect on what you learned. First question. Will you be using the information presented in this webinar to adjust your strategy when planning virtual fairs for the spring? The second question is, would you appreciate seeing these findings again after spring semester? We anticipate probably fewer fairs than fall, we think, if it tracks to in person, but we're excited to look at trends. So hopefully you are as well. So I'll give you guys 15 more seconds. Please give us your answers. All right, so let's cut the poll off. All right, 76% said yes, they would use this information. 2% said no, and 22% said maybe. Use it to adjust how you plan for your fairs in the spring, that is. And then when answering the question, would you appreciate seeing these findings again after spring? 98% said yes, that feels resounding, although 2% did say no. But I suppose you don't have to come to the webinar if we do it again in spring. So there you go. We will do it again. So let's now go to, I have selfishly put in an announcement before Q&A because we always lose everyone. I will go quickly. There will be a survey that pops up after this webinar. It is very, very helpful for us when you fill those out. It's short. I promise it will take you but a moment. And it seriously impacts our ability to do these well in the future. It helps us understand like what we need to do. Second, and hopefully this answers some of the questions I saw come in on the chat. We're going to have a virtual fair spring kickoff on January 13th with an encore on January 20th. Our event page, the one that I pushed in the beginning, it's on our blogs, on our website, go to our website, has the registration links. Come to those for the questions around, I saw some questions about features and changes to features and what will be different. That's what we're gonna cover that. So please do sign up to kick off your spring semester with us in a webinar. We are going to resume our office hours starting on the 14th. That's a great place to have the kind of conversation I saw happening today in the chat and ask a lot of the more nitty gritty questions. We are there. It's just Q&A. So please come to those. They're weekly. It's this crew there. Some people ask about employer trainings. We will be doing an employer training right at the start of the semester this year. So one will be happening on January 12th. The link will be to come. I will send it to you guys so you can send it to your employers, and we will also send it to employers. And the employer team at Handshake will also be doing office hours for employers. Hopefully that's good news for everyone. And finally, look out for a virtual fair launch kit. Reminder that the recording of this will come after the event. Let's go to a couple questions. All righty. So here's a question that I loved, and as a bias, I'm going to start with it. Someone said, have smaller colleges with 1,000 to 1,500 students had industry-specific fairs? So we asked around on the back end, and there are some examples of this, but what I think is even more important is that you could use some of, and I'd like my colleagues to weigh in, you could use some of the data today about the median number of sessions that students attend. There is no reason why you couldn't have a very targeted small fair at a small school, industry-specific fair, knowing what you know now about how many sessions students go to and kind of plan something that's very niche for a small audience. So I don't know if my colleagues have anything to add to that, but I would say go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Katie, I would just say we had small schools that also hosted niche fairs. The only thing that they adjusted for was numbers. In thinking about, obviously, you don't need 100 employers for a smaller school for a niche fair. And so they adjusted the numbers down so that it was a more intimate event. But there were plenty of small schools that also hosted niche fairs or industry-focused fairs.
Jake, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would also jump in and say we're seeing a lot of interest in multi-school fairs, you know, and if there is an industry focus and there are some partner schools that you would want to work closely with, that's a good way to make the fair size a little bit bigger and attract more employers.
Awesome. This came up so much that although it wasn't quite the subject, I do feel like we need to address it. There will not be a fee for spring 2021 to host your fairs on Handshake. And when it comes to the following year, we will have more information on that in the coming month or two. We will not wait to the end of the semester to tell you. We'll tell you earlier in the semester, the spring semester, about the following year. But I will say that what we're talking about right now is something that would fall to an employer, maybe registration fee, percentage of that fee. So we're really trying to make sure that we take a financial burden off of schools to host these fairs. We never want price to be inhibitive to holding your virtual fair event on Handshake. And Christine, you can feel free to correct me if you like, but that's what I would say to that question.
You are all correct. Thank you.
Great. Let's see. So I think my last question is about, I think we might need to wrap up. I don't want to hold people long. Boy, sorry, that was a real tease right there at the end. I'm sorry, guys. I want to say thank you to everyone who came. Thank you to the people who spoke at the webinar, and thank you to everyone who held the fair this year and allowed us to do this with you, because these are your students and your employers. And it was a real treat for us to be able to deliver this and see it all play out and then look back and see what a success it was. So thank you for coming. And please fill out the survey that pops up right after this. And we'll look forward to seeing you in January when we do it all again. Bye, everyone.